Добрый день, я приветствую всех на...
Good afternoon and welcome everyone at the briefing at the Minister of Foreign Affairs and Press Center. With us we have Russian and foreign correspondents. We start from the Minister's schedule. On the 16th of March, the head of the Russian Foreign Ministry, Sergey Lavrov, will hold negotiations with the Prime Cabinet Secretary, Foreign and Diaspora Affairs Cabinet Secretary of Republic of Kenya, Musalia Mudavadi, who will be in Moscow with a working visit from March 15 to 18. During the meeting, they will be discussing the current state and prospects of development of traditionally friendly Russian-Kenyan relations, delineate practical steps to further reinforce political dialogue and contacts on different avenues to grow mutually beneficial partnership in trade, economy, humanitarian spheres, and other spheres. There will be an exchange of opinions on topics of international and regional agenda of mutual interest with an aim to have a more effective coordination at the UN and other multilateral organizations. Now on to the relevant international agenda situation in Persian Gulf area. I would like to comment due to a large amount of questions that we are receiving. The session of the UNSC of March 11. As you know, the UNSC adopted the resolution 2817 proposed by Bahrain, condemning the strikes against the Arab states of the Persian Gulf, with the call on Iran to immediately put an end to this practice. Russia and China have abstained from voting on this resolution as we disagree with the very concept of document which has been prepared in total separation to the true reason of escalation in the region. We have an impression that Iran is just voluntarily, on their own accord, from their own malicious intent, started to attack sites and facilities in other countries. We've stated that the current crisis in the Middle East is based upon the unprovoked aggression of the United States and Israel against the Islamic Republic of Iran. We would like to express our deep dissatisfaction with the harmonization of this resolution. Its authors from Bahrain didn't want to accept any proposition, either from Russia or from China, regarding the balance of the text. Russia, with the support of Chinese partners, proposed that the UNSC adopt an alternative draft of this resolution intended to put an end to this escalation, for de-escalation, without striking against civilian infrastructure, without putting blame on anyone. So such an unbiased decision of the UNSC would be, in our opinion, acceptable to all members of the UNSC. However, only China, Pakistan, and Somalia voted in favor. The United States and Latvia and other countries voted against, and other countries were abstained, despite having no objections to the text of the document. It turns out that they are not interested in putting an end to the current confrontation in the Middle East, or at least we have an impression that despite the result of this vote at the UNSC on the 11th of March, we think it necessary to reiterate the right of the Islamic Republic of Iran to self-defense according to the Article 51 of the UN Charter. We've considered it unacceptable to strike against civilian infrastructure and targets and neighboring Arab states or in Iran or anywhere. We call on the United States and Israel to stop this aggression and return to the table of negotiations. It's important for every participant of the current standoff in the Middle East, including our Arabic partners, to exercise restraint, avoid double standards, and return to the efforts to put an end to this confrontation on the principle of good neighborliness. Russia will continue to take steps to have a speediest end to this confrontation in the Middle East and to resolve all disputes through peaceful means, and we intend to promote our concept of common and indivisible security in the Persian Gulf, which will allow to take into consideration of all countries of the region. Now, on the humanitarian situation in the Middle East, we estimate it as at least quite difficult. The number of victims of an illegal attack of Washington and Tel Aviv against the peaceful Operation Iran is in the thousands right now. Contrary to the attempts to silence and justify the aggression, the world community is finding out more and more information and officially confirmed and provided to those who watch the situation in regards to the barbaric bombardments of for example, the elementary school in the Minab and a university in Tehran, namely the Payam-e-Nur University, and many other targets, also in relation to our country, which I'll be talking about later. Civil infrastructure has been destroyed. Foreign diplomatic and consular missions in Iran are also being targeted. As we already said, that in Isfahan, the facilities of the Consulate General of Russia were also damaged during a missile strike as a collateral damage. In the very city of Isfahan, famous for its architectural masterpieces, unique sites of UNESCO World Heritage have been damaged, situated in the very center of the city. Historical monuments in the Iranian capital were also bombed, and the randomness of these strikes is stupefying. We expect the relevant international organization to have unbiased evaluation of the situation. I will be talking about the damage to the Russian facilities in the region a bit later. On March 7th, the United States and Israel shelled and set on fire 3 oil storage units in Tehran and its neighborhood. In the last decades, we've been discussing the environmental agenda, and as a result of these strikes, a huge number of CO2 and sulfur and nitrogen have been released as a result of these strikes. The oil got into the city sewers and was spread all over the city. There were acid rains. Millions of citizens found themselves in a toxic environment. And those chemicals and their influence to the air quality, to the water, elementary flux, flora and fauna will have a long-term negative impact. And this is all for the sake of the, as I quoted, the liberation operation and liberation of the Iranian people, and its liberation and prosperity. Due to the destruction of numerous hospitals, first aid stations, and a huge number of wounded, including women and children, the Iranian side addressed the friendly states, including Russia, with a request to provide medicine, and according to the medical supplies were dispatched, and we'll be informing you on the results of this through the relevant channels. So we are gravely concerned about the uncontrolled growth of this conflict. The military excursion of the United States and Israel led to the destabilization of the entire Middle Eastern region, and the conflict led to the impact on the territory of many Arab states of the Persian Gulf, and the harsh humanitarian consequences for the countries of the region that are friendly to us and the peaceful population. Now we need to put an end to this humanitarian and now environmental, radiological disaster threatening the entire region, and we need to return to the search for diplomatic solutions. Now, as I said, now on some additional comments on the destruction of a House of Russian Culture in Lebanon. On March 8th, as the Israeli strike on the city of Nabati in Lebanon resulted in destruction of the building of the House of Russian Culture. Unfortunately, this is not the first case of attacks against the Russian humanitarian presence in the Middle East. Let's remember the cases from history. In 1973, namely on October 10th, the direct hit of Israeli bombs and missiles resulted in destruction of the Soviet Cultural Center in Damascus. The airstrike resulted in the death of recently arrived curator of Russian language courses Alexandra Kalinicheva and member of the Syrian staff Mohammed Amin. This now, fortunately, there have been no victims. The director of the center, Asadea, and all the staff of the house are safe and sound. And I would like to point out that strike was not provoked. It was unprovoked. there was no military activity within the building or around it, or any type of activity that could be perceived as a military one or close to it. The House of Russian Culture in the town of Nabatea was founded in 2004 by the Assembly of the Russian Lebanon Business Circles. The Asadaya and Lilia Volchenko are presiding over the organization. The facility included Russian language courses, arts classes, dance classes, and a sports school. Which of these components would be perceived as a threat right now? Because the House of Russian Culture participated actively in cultural, patriotic, and humanitarian programs of Россотрудничества in Lebanon. There have been many joint events both in Nabatea and on the platform of Россотрудничества in Beirut. In 2023-2024, in cooperation with the mission of Россотрудничества in Lebanon, there have been many important events organized in the House of Russian Culture intended to develop bilateral ties in the area of education and culture. For example, the patriotic manifestations dedicated to the Victory Day, the Day of Liberation of Lebanon, special events in support of the special military operation, roundtables to combat Russophobia, and many other events. During the escalation of the Israeli-Lebanon conflict in 2024, the building was damaged, and the work to repair the building have just ended in November 2025. And children's classes were resumed in the building for little children. And with the start of a new spool of confrontation, the house was closed. And on March 8th, 2026, the facility of the Russian house, occupying one floor of a residential building, was completely destroyed. The personnel of the Россотрудничества mission in Lebanon or Russian house in Beirut are always ready to help. As was in October 2024, they are helping the Lebanese citizens who have suffered from the Israeli aggression. And the Russian house in Beirut once again reorients its work to conduct humanitarian actions. They are fundraisers to collect humanitarian aid. They are working with refugees in their displacement points. They are helping psychologically to kids and parents. They are attracting volunteers to work in community kitchens. They are blood donations also conducted. And to maintain resilience and prevent panic, the mission in Beirut continues their education activity, and some classes have been transferred to online format due to the current events. And now I would like to point everyone's attention that yesterday, in the second half of the day, we published at our portal and in our account in social media detailed information with reference to Ministry of Transport, Rosaviation, and our friendly agencies regarding the aid in returning the Russian citizens from the areas of conflicts. I will not repeat them right now, but still there are some recommendations not to visit several countries of the region. It is my sincere request, and I would like to point at the attention of media representative and publishing house, media personas, and users of the internet, and of course our tourist operators, our tourist sector, corresponding companies and organizations, to bear this in mind, to this very necessary information. Now on to the situation in Ukraine, and I would like to start with the date that is upcoming. The 16th of March of 2016. You remember that this day saw the referendum in Sebastopol, when the residents of the city voted to rejoin the Russian Federation. I would like to start with this very material because the Kiev regime, we are seeing from them threats and abuses directed against Crimean residents. What Zelensky allowed himself to say in regards to those who took part in the referendum back then, who supported it, and who didn't preclude the opportunity of voting during a democratic procedure. What Zelensky said to them, told them, is shocking. He called them, and I'm forced to quote it, he called them inhuman specimens. That's what he called them. It's not it's the first time when he is referring to people as specimens, and did he concretize right now who he has in mind when saying that? I will remind to this trash from Bankovaya Street how things really stood in 2014 on 16th of March. There was a historical choice to be made, which came as a result of a very difficult political processes that have started after the coup d'etat in Ukraine in 2014, which had their own history. The majority of Crimean residents expressed their desire to rejoin Russia. The results of the vote turnout were impressive. 96.7% of Crimeans and 95% of residents of Sevastopol supported the idea of rejoining the Russian Federation. On the 18th of March 2014, the Russian President Vladimir Putin signed the agreement to on the reunification of Crimea and Sevastopol to the Russian Federation. This is a very important historical, honest event, and which got the name returned to the home harbor and became a symbol of historical justice and the protection of rights of people's rights, and of course, doubtlessly, it was a result of the implementation of national interests. And we presuppose national interests not just as some abstract state or society. We mean people, citizens, those who did not separate themselves from the homeland that they considered as truly dear and near to them, their safe harbor, who didn't separate themselves from those they were forcibly separated from their big family. In the recent 12 years, Crimea changed a lot. The Crimea bridge was built, the very bridge that, according to Zelensky and Poroshenko, was built. It would not be built, or wouldn't be. It would be possible to build a bridge. I cannot imagine them saying that this kind of bridge could not be built at all. It would not be built. They were saying, well, where are we now? Are they really now saying that this is a hologram or it's not functioning? We've built it, in fact. And we remember what hate and outrage it caused from among the neo-Nazis, seeing this bridge revitalizing the lives of people, providing them not only with convenience, but even a symbol of reunification. And this bridge was targeted by terrorist attacks. This bridge that reconnected the peninsula with the mainland. Also, we've relaunched the Taurida water route. We improved education, implemented hundreds of projects of social importance. One of the more important changes was a significant update of the peninsula's infrastructure, which testifies to the existence of a long-term strategy to improve the quality of life of Crimean residents and responses of the opposition of the region in the scope of our country. All these projects are implemented in all areas, including healthcare, education, household areas. The economy of the peninsula is being reinforced by the federal program of supporting small and medium businesses and stimulating regional businesses. The peninsula has turned into an important tourist center for Russians, and this causes an inhuman outrage by the Kiev regime. The support of federal and regional authorities made Crimea an important area for leisure, for tourism, including for our youth. Incomparable nature, historical landmarks, and modern conveniences attract millions of visitors and guests. And just look at the historical infrastructure, historical facilities, which have been improved and developed thanks to the support from Russians. Now, for many years, compatriots. The environmental programs intended to preserve the nature of the peninsula, support of local arts, etc. The return of Crimea was a key point of the reunification of Russian society, and according to sociological studies, the majority of Russian citizens are have positive outlook to the reunification of Crimea. Around 86% of respondents consider this decision as right and sound. They are underlining their historical truth, importance of historical truth, etc. The very Crimean Spring of 2014 was important not only as a political act, but also what's most important. This is a symbol of unity, patriotism, and proud in their own country, and the very unforgettable that we don't leave our own behind.
Today we can confidently say that Crimea has occupied a dignified place among Russia's region, and it is a source of joy for its residents and its guests. Yes, there are many challenges in different spheres. We see that outrage, a lot of outrage, hatred, that is manifested in terrorist attacks, but we know we will overcome all that, and we know why that causes so much outrage. Because them, I mean the Kiev regime and its sponsors, those who are behind it, they have not invested the finances, they have not invested their soul into this unique place. By developing, they just did not pay attention to this region, did not pay much attention, and did not give opportunities to implement that cultural, what people have in mind in their soul, to implement that. And they have done everything to tear the residents, the population of the peninsula, not only from their relatives, but from their common culture space with Russia. They did it cruelly and bloodily. But then they understood that this unification will be inevitable. And they started to send so-called trains of friendship with fighters, armed fighters, in order to make sacrifices, to cause bloodshed, and not to allow what has happened. Because now they're angry. Incredibly angry, because for all those years it has been fantastic. Despite any challenges, it pursues its way together with Russia, together with all its people. Yes, I would highlight once again, now Crimea has occupied a dignified place among the regions of Russia. It brings joy to its residents and to its guests. We will continue our law and information work in bringing this real picture to the international community, the real situation. Of course, there are no congratulations in advance, no such tradition, but in this case, we can do that because we have lived through those events, and we congratulate the Crimeans and all the citizens of Russia with our common achievements, our common holiday. But about challenges, we will overcome them. And now those actions by the West, what they have caused in Ukraine, under its sponsorship, under its caring wing, the Kiev neo-Nazi regime under the disguise of some military expediency, continues to violate international humanitarian law, commits terrorist attacks, vents its anger for failures on the Russian civilian population. They have once again targeted civilian sites, residential buildings, medical and educational institutions, civil and social enterprises. Over the past week, more than 240 civilians have suffered, including 13 children. 31 people have been killed. Here I would cite some facts of the Bandera regime's crimes in specific regions that demonstrate the clear intent to escalate the conflict by Bankova. In the Bryansk region, on the 10th of March, a barbaric strike by the Ukrainian armed forces with Storm Shadow missiles. 7 people were killed and 42 people were wounded. There was a statement posted on the Russian Foreign Ministry website. The Bandera supporters also attacked the village of Klimovo with a drone. In Sevastopol, 9 civilians, including 3 children, were injured in a drone attack on the residential area of the city using explosive devices containing shrapnel. Those who do not know what an explosive device with shrapnel is, just consult the directories. Just read about that. I would reiterate, it was a drone attack against a civilian city, and children suffered. Kherson region, on the 5th of March, in the town of Aloshki, a Ukrainian UAV dropped a projectile near a grocery store. The target was chosen deliberately. 2 civilians were killed and 12 people were injured. A man was killed on the 9th of March in the village of Koropka. The Belgorod region, on the 8th of March, the Ukrainian armed forces attacked an ambulance. Fortunately, the doctors were not injured, as they were in a residential building providing assistance to residents. In the Zaporozhye region, on the 8th of March, a woman was killed. 8 people were injured in the town of Polokhi. A drone attack killed a married couple. And there were children, the young children in a car. A 6-year-old boy was wounded. On the 9th of March, in the Tokmak district, a drone struck a bus carrying the local youth football club Dieselist. The coach and 3 children born in 2011, 2012, and 2013 were injured. In the Saratov region, on the 5th of March, a drone strike on residential areas in Saratov injured 5 people. The regional clinical cardiology dispensary was hit, injuring an employee and a patient of this medical institution, I would highlight. In the Donetsk People's Republic, on the 8th of March, in the Kievsky district of Donetsk, a targeted shelling was conducted at the Children's Clinical Hospital number 1 and adjacent residential buildings. The hospital, restored just a month earlier, was destroyed. 4 people were killed, including 1 child. 12 people were wounded, including 1 teenager. The strike was carried out by French Scalp cruise missiles, just imagine. On the same day, on the 8th of March, a drone attack in the village of Gornyak killed 1 child and 3 adults. So how did they choose the targets by the Kiev regime? On that very day, the 8th of March, those Banderites and those Westerners supporting them, they have committed terrorist attacks against civilians. And who did they devote those crimes to? That holiday. But for all that, they will pay for that. Russian law enforcement agencies continue to take measures to prosecute Ukrainian militants and foreign mercenaries. A sentence in absentia was for Georgian citizen Beka Basilaia for crimes in the Kursk region. Yuri Musienko, a militant from the 47th Separate Military Mechanized Brigade of the Ukrainian Armed Forces, and the commander of the Special Operations Forces, Alexander Tripak, and his subordinate Bogdan Ivashina, for a terrorist attack on blowing up the highway overcrossing in Bryansk, Novozabkov, Belarus. 7 people were killed and 4 minors. 184 Ukrainian armed forces fighters and foreign mercenaries were convicted. 71 people were sentenced to life imprisonment for the murder of civilians and cruel treatment of prisoners of war. According to the Russian Investigative Committee, 9,339 criminal cases have been initiated for crimes committed by the Kiev regime since 2014. There are 1,264 defendants, including Ukrainian military personnel, members of radical groups, representatives of security forces, and foreign mercenaries. But let us have a look at such a beastly hatred. Despite the multi-billion-dollar financial injections from their Western masters, the situation of the Ukrainian armed forces is rapidly deteriorating. Those refusing to fight for the corrupt Kiev regime is growing. Their number is growing. The number of deserters ranges from 650,000 to 1 million people. The problem is aggravated by replenishing losses in frontline units, many of which are understaffed. They need to transfer air defense specialists, military engineers, artillerymen, deminers, and the fighters of the so-called International Legion disbanded at the end of 2025. They need to transfer them to assault detachments. And Zelensky has plans to recruit additional people. Yes, he has Napoleonic plans, but his fate will be the same. It will not be the fate of glory. For Ukraine, everything this is happening it's a tremendous tragedy. The people catches, they have gangster-like methods, setting ambushes in government buildings, shopping malls, courtyards, entries to buildings, apartment buildings. People are pulled right out of their apartments, dragged across the ground. But where are they dragged to? To certain death, not to protect the motherland, but for slaughter. They know that those tasks for which the Kiev regime gets money from the West are simple tasks. War until the last Ukrainian by the Kiev regime and the use of Western assistance, so-called Western assistance. Now I would like to deal more in detail on this Ukrainian mobilization. Since February the 1st, Ukraine effectively discontinues the fast-track mechanism for conscripts. The old lengthy approval process with the Ministry of Defense has been changed, and it deprives people of the necessary protection, making them easy prey, not for recruitment officers. They cannot be called that way, no longer in Ukraine. It's some people eating, people catching cells. But what was surprising for me personally, I could not imagine anything like that. We see many pictures, we see many images, we talk about that a lot, but now listen. In Ukraine, this mobilization, so-called mobilization, people whose income exceeds 2.5 minimum wage. So these are people who earn more than $500. So people whose income exceeds in 2.5 the minimum wage. So those people who earn more than $500. It's just difficult to perceive. It seems like a simple phrase. But not only the heart, but the mind refuses to perceive this as some adequate information. Yes, it could be a fantasy, yes. It could be some invention, yes. Some script for a catastrophic film, yes, maybe. But that's happening every day in the country that has chosen the democratic, as they have said, way of development in the 90s, and allegedly decided to speed up on the track in 2000. Just it's impossible to imagine that. Because the salary, rich or poor, they're included into the list, the register as critically important workers. So if you earn a little bit more, you are a critically important worker. You receive, you are exempted in Ukraine. But those who earn less, who do not receive this income financially, financial figures, they need to fight for what? For the corrupt Zelensky and for the geopolitical interests of those who participate in those corrupt stories by Zelensky. Actually, I could not imagine that in the 21st century there are many human rights norms and the global masterpieces of literature and cinema are available literally for everyone, also on the internet. When the world, the new generation, everyone, they have an opportunity on specific historical examples to know what is good and what is bad. When it cannot be concealed, it's available. Such thing has been committed in the center of Europe. It's the worst global practices. Yes, mobilization is conducted differently, different grounds, different categories. Historically, we have different examples, but in the 21st century, for the mobilization to be conducted as it is now conducted in Ukraine, those who are richer, they are exempted, and those who are poor, they are sent into this to this slaughter. Just try to find some similar things. The Ukrainian Ministry of Defense is preparing a bill to toughen penalties for evading conscription. The emphasis is shifting towards financial and material pressure on draft dodgers through the seizure of their property and the blocking of their accounts. Once again, not for them protecting their motherland, using their skills on the front, but to kill them. And they are also robbed simultaneously. There is also digital surveillance in Ukraine. You see that there are no more safe places in Ukraine, also online. And it's not surprising that against this backdrop, ordinary citizens are resisting conscription. They just see how many times this law, Zelensky has just mocked that legislation. Zelensky and his company, they know that in the corrupt Ukraine, this legal system is not working. But rather, is just working to service the corrupt Kiev regime. This activity is gaining momentum in Kiev and Kryvyi Rih, Vinnytsia, Odessa, Poltava, and Rivne. In 2022, according to the Ukrainian media, only 5 attacks on military registration and enlistment offices were recorded. In 2025, 341 attacks on them were recorded. It's not some invented drones, aggressors. Those are attacks by Ukrainian citizens, attacks against those hunting them, the Kiev regime. This year it has already been 24 attacks officially reported, only officially. And now the Kiev regime beastly actions in the religious area. On the 26th of February, the Kiev Regional Council, without waiting for the completion of the court hearing on the lawsuit filed by the State Service of Ukraine for Ethnopolicy and Freedom of Conscience, recommended to facilitate the transfer of its communities to the schismatic Orthodox, quasi-Orthodox Church of Ukraine and prevent the use of municipal property by the Ukrainian Orthodox Church. Just think about that. All those recommendations have been provided to the administrations and to the military structures. This decision was lobbied by the Regional Council Deputy Roman Titikala, I beg your pardon, who lamented the capital region's lag in the rate of raided seizures of Ukrainian Orthodox churches and the change of jurisdiction by its communities in favor of the self-ordained. According to this Titikala, the entire existence of the Orthodox Church of Ukraine from 2019 to 2025 allegedly voluntarily 307 religious communities of the Ukrainian Orthodox Church were converted, and more than 300 communities remain committed to the canonical church. This Titikala thinks that that's not right. And Archpriest Nikita Chekman, a lawyer of the Ukrainian Orthodox Church, promised to provide a full legal assessment and initiate appeal proceedings against the decision. Specifically, it was the violation of Article 19, which obligates local governments to act solely within the scope of the relevant law and does not grant them the right to influence the canonical subordination of religious communities. Furthermore, this decision violates Article 35 of the Constitution, which guarantees the separation of church and state and is obligated to maintain neutrality and has no right to induce changes in the subordination of communities or does not allow to interfere in their internal decisions.
On February 25th, the Ukrainian Ministry of Culture opened a controlled access to the near caves of the Kiev-Pecherovsk Lavra, closed since August 2023. I saw this information in Ukrainian media, especially in the TV channels. The head of the agency and the Vice Prime Minister on the issues of interim policy, Tatiana Verezhnaya, pointed out that the current exhibitions on the nearest and further caves will take only half an hour and will be accompanied by the 4 staff members of the monastery and law enforcement agents. What is this? An escorted exhibition? Madam Berezhnaya also mentioned that from now on, the regime of so-called spiritual independence will be strengthened. Just think about it. This spiritual independence regime will only be strengthened from now on. And this surpasses Orwell, all those fiction writers. This is something that none of any film directors or writers from the utopian and anti-utopian could predict. Only Mikhail Bulgakov could predict something like this. He found some metaphors similar to what's going on right now there. But this was more about differences between the reality and fiction in his works. Now we see the true fiction come to life in Ukraine with the strengthening, aggravating of the regime of spiritual independence. She didn't clarify what that means. However, there is no doubt that Zelensky regime will try to continue to root out the canonical orthodoxy. The head of the Orthodox Church of Ukraine, Metropolitan Epiphanius, or Sergey Domenko, conducting his exhibition The Caves for Tatiana Berezhnaya, who admitted never having visited it before, talked about the measures taking in this holy site. What did they exactly do, you might imagine? They actually were proud about Ukrainifying the site. All the signs and tablets in the Church Slavic language were replaced by the same tablets in Ukrainian. What to say about them? If they retranslated Gogol from Russian to Ukrainian, this only continues in the same vein in them being separating themselves from the Russian culture and Russian language. If they wanted to replace the signs from the Slavic church language into Ukrainian, it's their business. And now they needed to rewrite everything. We already saw it all. This is the worst thing that happened now to Ukraine in the 20th century. This is the worst thing that happened, and that's the very part of their history, or our common history, that they took and praised and glorified. We see the Kiev regime doing everything for the quasi-Orthodox Church of Ukraine to swallow the Ukrainian Orthodox Church whole, to become the singular national church, but this will not be successful. They will fail, despite the forceful takeovers of temples, despite the rewriting of history, despite the rewriting of text into Ukrainian. No matter what they do, we see that people are not too much in a hurry to change their allegiance to the new church. They are not in a hurry to become the part of this Orthodox Church of Ukraine, and the seized temples are now standing empty. We see this, and it's a shame, it's a disgrace, because those temples are empty. What will they do then at the Ministry of Culture of Ukraine? What else will they come up with? This agency of state service regarding the policy of freedom of conscience, aggravating the cultural independence, spiritual independence regime. Will people be forcefully collected there in those temples? We saw such examples in the past, so it's possible. The only thing that they could do correctly is to admit their own mistakes, at least at the level of mistakes. This could become some point of some turning point, but no, they are adamant on continuing their same policy without apologizing for anything. The very massacre that we're witnessing coming everywhere, not only in the battlefield, and we are witnessing this spiritual fight for the heart and soul of a person, especially in the context of this aggravated, very barbaric, beast-like war against the memorials in Ukraine. On 10th of March, we found out another act of vandalism in regards to a historical monument in Odessa. This time, the Banderites have mobilized themselves against the column of Alexander, the monument erected in year 91, not in 1991. Perhaps there was some hastily erected monument, one might think, but no, this monument was erected back in 1891. This monument was established that year, and it went through a lot, the entirety of the 20th century, but it didn't manage to survive the Kiev regime. When in 1891 it was erected, 10 years after the death of Emperor Alexander II, and it presented itself as a sort of a copy of column of Alexander in St. Petersburg. It was situated in the park, in a park that was opened in 1875 with direct assistance of Emperor Alexander II, who had planted the first tree in that park. In the following years, this park changed its name, lost and found new symbols. However, the monument, namely the column, was one of the main sites of the park and the entire city. According to the official version of events, some vandals armed with sledgehammers broke the tablets and tore away the imperial coat of arms of Odessa, because it had a Russian two-headed eagle and the crown of the Russian Empire on it. They also posted it into a social network with the phrase, "Odessa continues to rid itself of everything imperial and Russian. We expect a full-fledged demolition conducted by the State Council." Can you even imagine how the city of Odessa, which was founded not only during the Russian Empire, but also by a Russian emperor, namely the Empress Catherine the Great. Can you imagine the city having to rid itself from all the imperial and Russian heritage? Should it just eliminate itself, demolish itself? Maybe those neo-Banderites, after that, neo-Banderites will be satisfied without leaving a single stone in the city. What else should they demolish? Conscience. As we understand, there's no conscience left. According to police information, there were 5 vandals, and they did their deed and at 3 o'clock in the morning, so during the martial law, during the curfew, to be exact, where you cannot do anything without a corresponding order from the mayor's office of the city. And just imagine the drive that these neo-Nazi gang of Ukrainians were trying to destroy the monument of their own people, their own culture. One can hardly identify them as their own people, take into consideration that they are destroying his heritage. However, that's what they claim, network that they are living in one space with their compatriots. This testifies to the imminent collapse of the Kiev regime. The same thing were conducted in the Third Reich. The same things were conducted by other civilizations that simply vanished from history. Preparing to flee, they destroyed everything, burned everything that they couldn't get out of the occupied territories. Remember the Hitlerites, they did the same. They wanted to destroy any traces of their crimes, or they were just trying to cause as much harm as possible. History put everything in order at the end. All the aforementioned facts and everything that we have been talking and will be talking confirm the relevance of our task to denazify, demilitarize Ukraine and remove traits emanating from its territory, and all those goals will be accomplished. Now on Moldova, I came up with an interesting formula with the help of my colleagues. If things are going bad, you just need to blame Russia. That's the mentality of the Moldovan authorities. The worse the situation in Chisinau is, the more they complain about our country. On March 5th, the MFA of Moldova published the so-called warning for Moldovan residents, where they stated the alleged reinforcement of the practice of persecution or even detention when entering Russia and its territory. They are lying. It's in the territory of Moldova where those things are happening. Evgenia Gotsul is an example of that. You don't even think about the non-existent threats. It's the authorities in Chisinau that you need to be worrying about. They are reinforcing the practices of threats, scare tactics, and detention. Other countries are doing that, not Russia. Maya Santos regime is doing that. They are, of course, no proof, because they have none. Only bare-bones statements where they say that in Russia there's nothing to gain. You shouldn't go there. Just don't ask why, just believe us. That's the very powerful argument of the highest order that they have. Everything is actually in reverse. The Moldovan authorities are disrespectful towards the Russian citizens entering Moldova, but they're also disrespectful to the very same Moldovans. Have you forgotten that? That's the Fasando regime practice, not to let the Moldovan citizens to leave their country, and then to obstruct people trying to enter, even their own citizens. Unlike official Chisinau, we are ready to provide official facts, and we will give them. Upon arrival to the Chisinau airports, the holders of Russian passports are regularly subjected to degrading search and checking, and there are some cases of extremely long waiting times in transit zone without any conveniences provided, any opportunity to contact the outside world. When departing from Chisinau, there are some artificial delays of search procedures causing the passengers to be late for boarding, and the consular support is impossible because the employees of the Russian embassy in Chisinau are not allowed to visit the detainees. In any case, we see that we had to recommend the Russian citizens to consider this and to abstain, if possible, from visiting the Republic of Moldova. The Chisinau is doing everything in their power to hamper the teaching and the use of Russian language in the country. I would like to remind everyone that 80% of residents of Moldova speak Russian. They have also elaborated different mechanisms to limit the participation of Moldovan teachers in different educational programs in Russia. They're also working on the question of withdrawing the recognition of degrees for the spread of the Russian propaganda. And they still have the goal to accuse us of imperialism. We see continued attempts of Chisinau to rewrite the historical memory of Moldovans, to cultivate a negative attitude towards Russia, to demonize the Soviet past of the Republic. On the 6th of March, the Ministry of Education of Moldova declared a competition of movies for college students on the key events of the history of the 20th century of Moldova. Among the topics they've declared are deportations organized by the by the Soviet totalitarian regime, and the deliberate starvation in the Moldova SSR. This is a guilty conscience, some goal they have to educate their own children in complete ignorance of history, complete ignorance of the facts, how people went hungry, where they were hungry, and what was the reason for that, what this was caused by. This is heinous. They are following the footsteps of Ukraine and Baltic states, and they are trying to convince the public that in the period of 1945 to 1990, the Soviet authorities sent alcoholics and criminals to work in Moldova. That's the ideological tenets that they're currently promoting. Turns out that the antisocial elements turned Moldova into a prosperous republic. That's what it was, which lived for decades on the foundation that they've created. And we will be providing the corresponding link in the text of our briefing. Everything I've just mentioned is pondering on surreal, and it's an attempt to escape an easy truth into some artificial world where Russia is to blame for everything. You can't do that, and you will fail in doing that. And they will not be able to turn the Moldovan citizens into ruthless society. We saw everything happening before in similar circumstances. Moldovan people are people with their proud historical memory, their own culture, their own traditions, with a deep affection for their homeland, knowing its history. And the current breakdown of the economy, social, and education spheres is the result of the actions of Maya Sandu and her sponsors from Brussels, and they are the only ones to blame and to be accountable for the current state of affairs. And we've just mentioned the lawlessness of the Kiev regime in regards to the religion in the country, and we talk every week about the facts provided to the public organizations in the United States and through our embassies and through our clergy, and there have been incredible amounts of data provided by us. You can't even name a briefing that we have in recent times where we haven't touched upon this topic, and all those briefings have been interpreted into English, mind you. And against this backdrop, we see a report in regards to the Commission of the United States Commission on the Freedom of Religion in 2025. This is a report on how people are comfortable and convenient in exercising their religious sentiments, and in regards they have an opportunity to exercise their religion, or how there are obstacles and who is giving those obstacles.
Возможно.
So you would say maybe the situation in Ukraine was not topic number one, because Americans, they primarily think about themselves, about their own actions, and the majority of people maybe will have the understanding or feeling that this report by the U.S. Commission on International Religious Freedom could begin this year with one phrase that the United States themselves, right now, these days, these weeks, violate the rights of the believers, in particular Muslims, by their attacks, their bombings. During the holy month of Ramadan, holy for Muslims. And as I have mentioned earlier at the beginning, they do not notice their own violations of the believers' rights by attacking the sovereign states in the month of Ramadan, and they have not noticed the Kiev regime being subordinate to the West, to the United States of America, just violating the rights of believers, literally harassing, destroying the Orthodox religion. So this report was released on the 4th of March. It's an annual report. And this is the so-called blacklist from the last year's blacklist. Russia was transferred to it, who was there as, quotation, a country of particular concern. So just imagine, we have so many religions, global religions, confessions. They make statements on Russian TV, in media outlets. They have their websites, social networks, international conferences. They have their events in their professional areas, educational, scientific, traditional events. They hold meetings. They're regularly received by authorities, representatives, executive authorities, primarily president, executive authorities, legislative authorities, and so on. But not a single time during the last 20 years, they have not mentioned any global or issues that could not be resolved that are connected with religions. And I would draw your attention that confessions representatives have on multiple occasions highlighted that for their confessions for Orthodoxy, Christianity, Catholicism, Buddhism, Islam, the highest ranking spiritual leaders, they highlighted that for their confessions, it's a historical moment of renaissance when new opportunities emerge connected with their cult, education, state, society interests, opportunities for preaching, publishing literature, holding seminars and conferences. They all highlight not just one representative of a certain confession, but each confession it highlights. But, so to say, the U.S. Commission on International Religious Freedom, it's more competent here, and Russia is a country of particular concern, according to them. So here the proposal is not original. Just imagine to impose what? In relation to Russia, yes, you're right to impose sanctions against a number of Russian agencies and officials and confessions. Our confessions did not mention, not once, that they have any problems. But from America, it's they can see it better. On many occasions, it duplicates the accusatory cliches. It's about the ban on the Jehovah's Witnesses sect in our country. Other extremist structures like Hizb at-Tahrir al-Islami. There are also insinuations regarding the goals of the special military operation. Yes, that was also included into that report of the Commission on International Religious Freedom. But they claim to be objective. So they ignore the problem of blatant persecution of the canonical Ukrainian Orthodox Church by the Kiev regime. So according to them, this problem does not exist. So in this context, the meetings were held on the capital in November and December 2025 between several legislators and U.S. Christian organizations. Not a word has been said, nothing of the kind. So they just continue to peddle human rights narratives, to create additional tools to interfere in the internal affairs of foreign states, perhaps to justify their own existence. Those assessments are predictable, that division between good and bad countries, depending on whether they follow Washington's lead or pursue their independent policies. So where is this Washington lead? So the number of penalized countries as well as the set of typical complaints against them, that can be predicted in advance. And the aforementioned report confirms that. The situation with tankers. I would like to draw attention to two of them. On the 1st of March, Belgian authorities announced in the media the detention of the Guinean-flagged tanker Ethera in Belgium's exclusive economic zone, and one of the crew members is a Russian citizen. A judicial and administrative investigation is currently underway, and none of the crew members have been arrested or detained. The crew remains on board and performs its official duties. Our embassy takes the necessary steps to establish contact with the Russian citizen and ensure that his legal rights and interests are respected. The second situation, we have mentioned it before in the comment. On the 3rd of March, at 4 a.m. local time. It's about Maltese time. Arctic Metagaz gas carrier, Russian flagged, with 30 Russian crew members that carried 4,000 cubic meters of liquefied natural gas, was attacked in the Mediterranean Sea near the coast of the island of Malta. The vessel was deprived of electricity. There was a gas explosion. However, the crew demonstrated courage and professionalism. All the crew members managed to evacuate. Thanks to professional activities by the crew, there were no casualties. And the search operation was assisted by other vessels in the region with Russian crew, and they detected that boat. The crew was assisted, and they were on the way to the Russian port. But in Western media outlets, there was a fake information that the vessel caught fire and caught fire by itself. It was false information, and there were urgent messages about evacuation, but the Maltese authorities declined evacuation of the Russian crew, and the Libya service assisted by sending its boat. And with the cooperation of a Russian embassy in Libya, the crew received medical assistance, and after their medical condition was admitted acceptable for their flight to Russia, 2 crew members were taken by special flight to Russia and taken to hospital. The attack on a commercial civilian vessel is a blatant violation of international sea law. It's striking against civilian side and detrimental to the environment. And in other words, it's about a terrorist attack and a military crime. And that was done in proximity, in the vicinity of the EU countries, their borders, but none of the EU states condemned that what has happened. Human rights, no, they have not heard about it in the European Union. But literally today we drew attention to the messages about the official Yerevan declining the Russian side's initiatives to provide humanitarian aid to the refugees from Karabakh. So in order to avoid any speculations, We were not going to make public comments about it, but as there were questions, I will just deal with this issue in more detail. Russia has never left people of the mentioned region without assistance, and has always assisted people in Karabakh, and was among the first to send humanitarian aid to the region. However, they were not very glad about Russian assistance for some reason. No thanks, as they said, but now a new denial, refusal. It was in the area of operation of Россотрудничество in Eurasia, Russian humanitarian mission, launched in July, based on a request by Armenian humanitarian organizations and the communities situated in far region. So why did they refuse? Those were products, aid kits and specialized products for children. So it was around 40 tons. So the Armenian authorities, they need to pay more attention to social tasks, living conditions, social reintegration. It's their competence, the competence scope of the local authorities, and then humanitarian assistance. It should have helped them to focus on the primary goals. But the main thing is the assistance to people. Moreover, part of goods and products, those were product kits, they were purchased directly in Armenia. It was an additional impetus to local production and small businesses and created an important additional effect. In itself, the refusal by Yerevan to cooperate further, it could have been understandable if the aid wouldn't be needed, but it would have been obvious by the Russian side not to offer that aid if it is not needed. Let us have a look at the fact. A number of requests by Armenian citizens for such assistance was growing. But the basis of Yerevan not agreeing on the new shipment of aid, it just causes more questions than answers. So I will quote: "The legal norms of Armenia limit the provision of donations and assistance in the period before the elections." End of quote. So we have tried to find out what exactly they mean, but the Armenian authorities, they had difficulty to precise which acts they meant. So such restrictions are imposed only on the structures whose name can be somehow linked to names of parties, for example, who participate in elections. Maybe they meant that. So how does that concern this situation, as the international and charity organizations, they can just participate in pre-election processes, but how is that connected, pre-election processes and humanitarian aid? So the assistance provided by our country to other countries because of casualties, conflicts in different corners of the world. Naturally, we tell about that, but in this particular case, When there were questions, we answered them, but for that to become some propaganda or agitation, that has never been the case. Actually, we have not mentioned that much. We mentioned humanitarian assistance to other countries when we were asked a question, we replied, but in detail we have not dealt with this issue. But to invent that is somehow connected, it's impossible. The refusal by Yerevan to receive this charity assistance is just pre-election wishes of the authorities to clear any mention of the Russian Federation. Who do they intend to make to cause harm? Their own citizens who are really in need and who have always received the assistance. Actually, all this situation, it causes questions. People who have received tons of this assistance and want to receive it further. What explanation will they receive? That Russia refused to provide assistance? No. Just say it as it is. They have refused themselves, but why? And just try to invent some explanation. So there were questions about to the German authorities treating our Russian compatriots and citizens. German authorities, they continue their sophisticated discrimination against Russian citizens and Russian-speaking compatriots. This discrimination, it takes different forms. Irrevocable confiscation of clothing at airports, personal belongings, cash. Many thousands of fines for non-compliance with the so-called anti-Russian sanctions. Restrictions on banking services, including endless checks and requiring various types of documents. So they deliberately continue to view virtually any Russian citizens present in Germany as suspicious, fostering an atmosphere of distrust and so-called toxicity around Russians. Just arbitrary and lawless treatment. Once again warn against visiting Germany unless absolutely necessary, and we strongly recommend to follow the relevant warning posted on the Russian Ministry of Foreign Affairs website. We will cite this link in the text version of the briefing. Now about vandalism in the military cemetery in Gdansk. The remains of more than 3,000 Soviet soldiers lie there. Red Army soldiers, 2,500 officers who died fighting for the liberation, not of some abstract cities, but of that very city, Gdansk. And the central element of the memorial, an arched concrete wall with bas-reliefs and memorial plaques. It was defaced with inscriptions and symbols glorifying Ukrainian Nazis.
Our foreign mission has immediately came up with a protest, an official protest, and called to prevent corresponding events in the future. It's long known that official Warsaw does everything to remove everything connected with the history of Soviet Union and Red Army, liberating the Polish people from their slavery and the subjugation on the part of Nazi Germany. Hundreds of murals have been demolished, and the acts of vandalism are not being punished. The events that happened are not even beyond the scope of any practices conducted by Poland regarding the lack of historical memory. This is a disgusting example of Russophobia in Poland, And this is a flagrant nationalism in Poland, and it proves the fact that those who are trying to exercise unpunished hatred and towards Russians, Russophobia, are sooner than later degrading into an ordinary Nazism, insulting the memory of their ancestors. And now on another important historical event. Since we are marking on the 12th of March 86th anniversary of the conclusion of the Soviet-Finnish War of 1939-1940, also known as Winter War, and this conflict was preceded by negotiations between the USSR and Finland, during which the Soviet leadership came up with proposals to sign a mutual assistance treaty and on exchange of territories, which had a strategic significance to ensure the security of the Soviet Union in the conditions of the aggravating military-political situation in Europe. All those propositions of the USSR were rejected by the Finnish side, and a short but very bloody war began, which lasted 105 days, which predictably ended with the defeat of Finland. The results of the Soviet-Finnish War of 1940-1940, including territorial concessions on the part of Helsinki, war enshrined in the Moscow Peace Treaty. They were also confirmed in the Paris Peace Agreement in 1947, concluded after the Second World War. And for a long time we had an impression that historical lessons have been learned by official Helsinki. During many decades, Finland stuck to the policy of non-alignment to military blocs and was friendly towards the Soviet Union. Then Russian Federation tried to pragmatically and beneficially to resolve practical issues of interacting with our country. However, we were forced to state that in recent times, with the arrival of new generation of Finnish politicians in Finland, we see a radical demolition of all preceding foreign policy courses, including the heritage of mutually respectful good neighborliness and coexistence with Russia. This is not some marginal idea that was ascended to political Olympus and then discarded. No, this is a new ideology. The country has joined the adversary military bloc of NATO, not only adversarial to our country, but also just an aggressive military bloc, and is also consistently growing the military expenses, which are now currently 2.5% of GDP, and they have plans to increase them further. There are also some Russophobic propaganda in the Finnish society. There's a widespread militarization of society under the slogans of increasing defensiveness. This begs a question: does the Finnish establishment realize what will be the result of this reckless policy? Obviously not. A couple of weeks ago, the European Union was desperately forbidding themselves to purchase Russian energy. And after what has happened in the Middle East, we saw the prices for energy resources skyrocketing. And after we mentioned it, they skyrocketed even further. And who was to blame for that, according to Europeans? Who was to blame? Who was to blame for any hardships of the population? They started to blame Russia for that. And I quote that they were trying to accuse Russia of profiteering and profiting from this situation in the world. And I would like to remind them that they have just banned themselves from buying energy from Russia by all types of sanctions. They were laughing at the heritage given to you by your EU and by the predecessors at the EU who have signed beneficial contracts regarding the shipments of energy from Russia to Central and Western Europe, and you, European officials, you were laughing at this matter. It seemed to you a laughing matter and not to investigate the Nord Stream attacks. But today, when the situation changed, where your exact policy resulted in hardship, you have started to frantically search for someone to blame. This is a strategic mistake that you've conducted, and I think, personally, that is a crime of European Union officials against their own population, their own residents. Everything that's obviously not beneficial to the residents of the Western European countries, everything that countered their intrinsic national interest, everything that crosses out their innovative achievement, all this would lead to colossal expenses and to a drastic reduction in the life quality and well-being of those states, and militarization of countries. In particular, Finland never responded to the interests of the country. Peace-loving and good neighborliness responded to the interests. Countering Nazism and fascism responded to the true interests of Finland and its population alike, and not militarization. Joining aggressive blocs didn't, and this was tested by time. Why do you repeat your own mistakes from the past? The lessons of a recent past, unfortunately, are completely forgotten by the current establishment in Finland. They are recklessly ignoring all those lessons. However, we have not expected anything better. The quality and level of their training and their acumen speaks for themselves. Just enough. It's enough to remember the statement of the Foreign Minister of Finland, Elina Valtonen, who in December 25 stated that, in her words, that in the last 400 years, Russia attacked 19 neighboring states, and no one attacked Russia in return, according to her. In the last 100 years, that's what she said. She managed to utter these words at the 80th anniversary of the victory in the Great Patriotic War, where nobody attacked Russia, obviously. Once again, in this anniversary year, our country honored the memories of dozens of millions of victims of the war. And now our court elevated the case to represent a genocide of our people. But she managed to do that nonetheless. But there are good news after all. On the 11th of March, the conference on Far East and Arctic Sustainable Development started work in Moscow. It is dedicated to the questions of development of the Arctic region and the Far East of Russia. The forum is being conducted since 2016, reuniting the authorities and the experts and the public organizations. The work of the organization includes 7 roundtables related to the sustainable exploration of this territory, the Northern Sea Route topic, and the Atlantic Transport Corridor, and the prospects of development of energy sphere, introduction of digital technologies, digitalization of infrastructure, and the support for indigenous peoples in the Arctic. The significance of this conference is difficult to overestimate. The Far East and the Arctic are one of the most important strategic regions for our country from the standpoint of resources and transport and energy security. Development of these territories is one of the long-term priorities of Russia. And here we have an important deposit of natural resources, and we are forming new logistical routes. We're implementing large infrastructure projects, And our actions in this avenue is intended to bolster international cooperation in the area of science, transport and energy. In the framework of the plenary session that happened yesterday, it was attended by the director of the European Issues Department, senior official in the Arctic Council, Mr. Maslenikov, who made a statement regarding the international cooperation in the northern latitudes. There will be also an awarding of for the development of the Arctic, marking the achievements in that domain. We also invite all the media, including our foreign correspondents accredited in our country and accredited by the MFA, to take part in covering this event. I'm convinced that the Arctic countries' representative will be interested in the Russian experience in exploring the North regions. As per tradition, the link for this event will be provided in a text version of the briefing and regarding websites. We have updated or renewed the practice of preparation of weekly information bulletins. We got the idea that this is in high demand right now. We had a lot of requests to have an updated form of information bulletins. The publications will be provided in the corresponding section of our website, in the press service section of our website, and every Monday regularly the users will be able to get convenient format news in convenient format, allowing themselves to familiarize with the key materials on international topics from the official websites of the President, the government, and the Minister of Foreign Affairs of the Russian Federation. We'll be starting from every Monday, and then we'll see how it will go. Perhaps we could do it in some extended to some other day. Depends on the feedback that we'll receive. I'm convinced that this section will be interesting to the relevant experts and foreign relations students and all those who are interested in the foreign policy. This will be a very interesting archive of main foreign policy events and will provide an opportunity to monitor the information work of the aforementioned state agencies. We will be glad to get any feedback and any constructive criticism. Of course, it will be welcome. Another historical material. Now on the 170th anniversary since the birth of the Russian official, statesman, and diplomat Alexander Izvolsky. He was born on 16th or 18th in the new style, 18th of March 1856 in Moscow. In 1875, he graduated at the Lyceum of Alexander and started working at the Chancellery of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. In 1876, he was appointed to the Russian mission in Rome. Further, he worked in the Consulate General in Eastern Rumelia, which was an autonomous province of the Ottoman Empire, practically under control of Bulgaria. Then in the embassies in Romania and the United States in 1894 and 1897. He was a minister resident with the Holy See. In 1897 and 1906, he was an ambassador he was an minister counselor in Serbia, Bavaria, Japan, and Denmark. In 1906, he was appointed as Minister of Foreign Affairs. He proposed a plan to reform the ministry, to modernize the structure, unify the conditions of diplomatic service in the central apparatus and abroad. He also proposed staff rotation and also the increase of professional level of all the employees. The main task of foreign policy, he considered it to stabilize the international situation of the country, to restore its military political potential, and the conclusion of the bilateral agreements with great powers. In his report to Nicholas II regarding his negotiations with European officials of 6 November 1907, the minister wrote the following: that the temporary weakening of international stance of Russia due to the revolutionary movement and destruction of our forces due to the Far Eastern War led to the fact that balance in Europe was threatened significantly and caused a very dangerous regrouping of states in regards to the preservation of peace. Mr. Izvolsky reached the agreements of between Russia and and in Great Britain, then the Russian-Japan agreements demarcating the spheres of influence in the Central Asia and the Far East, and also strived to revitalize the work of Russia in the Balkans and the change of status of Bosphorus and Dardanelles. In 1910, he continued diplomatic service as an ambassador to France. Understanding the inevitability of war, he helped to consolidate the Entente on the eve of the First World War. In his letter to Pyotr Stolypin, he mentioned that he could honestly say that he placed Russia in a more advantageous position compared to previous times, and gave it all support beams necessary and precluded any mishaps in foreign and Middle East. We will be publishing corresponding materials related to this very important anniversary in diplomatic area. I'm ready to answer your question. Is international affairs with us today? Yes. At the start of the week, the chair of the European Commission, Madame von der Leyen, mentioned that the EU should be ready to be more decisive in demonstrating their power, because they could not rely on systems, on a rules-based system anymore in fighting threats. How would you comment on this statement? You know, I propose to have a little bit of a clarification of this quote, because the quote is extremely amusing. She said that, and I quote, that Europe should be able to project its power, so to deter, counter, and reinforce its influence. And the very EU leadership is also ignoring the fact that the EU has never in its existence been more respectable and influential than back when they were demonstrating their intent to have a peaceful development and promotion of positive agenda based on the beneficial provision of Russian energy resources according to agreements we reached with them. What now is left from this? Only trifles, there's only a little left. We see a crisis of economy, which they are also witnessing. We are seeing that their heritage of the political predecessors being eroded, despite the fact that their predecessors had the wisdom to conclude beneficial long-term agreements and treaties with our country, beneficial infrastructural projects, for example, to get energy. Nothing is left now.
Знавшие
The successfully developed quite unprecedented Euro integration project that under its deathly wing has united the Western European countries that used to be at war. So what has been left from that project? Everything has changed. But to quote the time that has changed is just useless, because it's not the new year has come and everything has changed. It's the Brussels officials that are creating those benchmarks. According to Ursula von der Leyen statement, it's a basic transformation of an aggressive, intractable, and confrontational international player. Today, Western Europe is the main driving force of that war coalition, and defense spending is growing. In the EU, they have grown by almost 60% compared to the same period in February 2022. So the total military spending by the EU member states in 2025 amounted to 381 billion euro, making it the second highest in the world. So just let me remind you how much money they have spent for the terrorist Kiev regime in the center of Europe, billions of euros. That uncontrollable terrorist regime using those funds against civilian population for terrorist and extremist purposes. So apart from all the other problems, they have created yet another Nazi beast in the center of Europe. They have armed it. They have provided money to that, as they have done in the 1930s. It's clear that the militarization of the EU is done not in the interests of ordinary European citizens, but rather to please transnational arms manufacturers, lobbyists, and intermediaries. So it's just visibly the corruption factor that we have mentioned for many times in the recent years. It's clear the desire to profit, and not only by political operators in Ukraine. Thank you very much. Thank you. Is Russia Today with us? I would like to precise, is Russia Today with us? If not, we will move on. Is Izvestia with us? Yes, hello, Madam Zakharova. Our question is about a threat by Europe to transfer nuclear arms to Kiev. Why does the West, why is it not afraid of those red lines? So it's just a combination of silliness. It's just interdependent events, common degradation that we observe in the last decades. It's just insanity of the European ruling elites. There is something rational in the statements, opinions of those who are convinced that the factor of that reasonable fear of the previous generations of the Europeans with regard to what is connected with nuclear weapons and their propagation. So the US have stationed on the territory of Western Europe their own American nuclear weapons, and they have not allowed those Western European regimes have not allowed them to participate in governing those nuclear facilities. So it's the factor to which they have no relation, neither philosophically, nor legally, nor politically. So they are just hostages of that situation. And the games with the historical truth have also played their role when those who placed the weapons on their territory and used that nuclear weapon against civilians and against sovereign countries, and by testing those nuclear bombs on living people, they just started inventing tales that those were not them, and the bombs fell on Hiroshima and Nagasaki from above. So it has been for decades this distortion of historical truth. Although we possessed nuclear weapons, we have done that according to the international obligations. Each school child, he was educated special relation to that issue, and he was told about the dangers of a nuclear war, the consequences that come after the use of nuclear weapons. In Western Europe, this issue became rather a field for manipulation, and they do not base on facts and historical truth. So that's where we should look for the roots. But in general, some banalization of military and nuclear problems by the European capitals by irresponsible rhetoric and they do not correct their responses. On Bankova, they said that they should drop nuclear bombs on Moscow, on Russians. They just kept sending money, even more money to them after that. And a lot of statements on those issues. Now the authorities in Europe, they allow for a possibility of practical implementation of destructive schemes. Attempts to use nuclear weapons to achieve situational goals. Now they just make statements about shipments of those weapons, nuclear weapons, in collaboration with Paris, Berlin, London. Just some cars, several divisions, a couple of tanks, and so on. As it requires special preparation, they forget that it's a highly sensitive issue, but they have presented such arguments when it was about building nuclear stations. When it's peaceful atom, they will find some environmentalist public figures who are trying to ban that. But then it's about some network business, nuclear business for military purposes in violation of the previous norms and provision, all of them. It's just perceived in Western Europe as some possible, acceptable philosophy, politology, and why not present those arguments? So this idea is about the flagrant case connected with the data unveiled by Russian special services, London and Paris, assisting Kiev in the creation of a dirty bomb and transfer of nuclear weapons. It's just mad and mad aspiration to inflict the defeat on Russia. It's just no instinct of self-preservation. But now they say that it's unacceptable transfer of nuclear weapons to Kiev. Right after the Second World War, after its end, former allies in anti-Hitler coalition, they just made plans to strike with the use of nuclear weapons, strikes against our country. It's a historical fact. You understand? So there is nothing impossible here. As they say, it's absolutely impossible. How can that be? As we see, the Kiev regime is just begging for that nuclear component, that it's lacking so much. What will they do with that further? They do not think about that in Paris or London, but they should do that. Because it's obvious the European elites are lacking strategical thinking. Because the authorities there think they are just temporary and do not bear the complete responsibility for their actions in historical scale. They can subordinate them to some situational, greedy purposes, their own purposes. But this phrase has been formulated in Central Europe, après moi le déluge, so you just remember, after me the flooding, who said that? So those political circles are just interested in this wave of militarization of Europe and raising the stakes in nuclear rhetoric. Maybe for the employment of such parasites, The European elites are just ready to ignore their own risks they are creating for regional and global security. Thank you. Yes, thank you. I would like to clarify, is Russia today with us? Yes, Madam Zakharova, hello. Thank you very much. We have one question. The Serbian Foreign Ministry has recently refused the statement in the Serbian public that Belgrade has asked Moscow not to raise the issue of Kosovo and Metohija in the UN Security Council. Does Serbia have the right to advocate for the retention of Kosovo and Metohija within its borders, given the conditions for Serbia's integration into the EU? And who can Serbia rely on to protect its territorial sovereignty and integrity? In accordance with the Constitution of Serbia and the UN Security Council Resolution 1244. So, according to the Constitution of Serbia, Kosovo and Metohija is an integral part of the country and enjoys broader autonomy. The UN Security Council Resolution 1244 confirms the sovereignty and territorial integrity of Serbia, including the autonomous province of Kosovo and Metohija, and regulates the activities of the international civilian mission and security forces tasked with maintaining peace and stability, and no other tasks. So Serbia is forced to reconsider its approach to the Kosovo issue. There is no such preconditions. The international legal framework remains the same. What you have mentioned, actually, those assertions are absurd and lack any substance. Do not rely on facts. In general, you can say they contradict common sense. In your question, there is also an additional question about the progress of Serbia towards the EU membership. This process is not measured by demands put forward by European bureaucrats, which are constantly revised to suit the current situation. It has turned into a politicized shell game, which Brussels is using to further increase pressure on Belgrade, including with regard to Kosovo. Instead of genuinely facilitating negotiations to seek solutions, the EU has been blackmailing the Serbs for years, while simultaneously unleashing the so-called authorities in Pristina in their desire to purge the province of its non-Albanian population. Meanwhile, the EU's 2013 written guarantees to establish the community of Serbian municipalities of Kosovo has been long forgotten in Brussels. It's cynically sabotaged by so-called politicians in Pristina. We have repeatedly stated that such maneuvers serve only one purpose: to replace the legitimate mechanisms of the EU Security Council with some kind of ersatz mechanism designed to lead Serbia to its EU membership. It's just incompatible. This formula reiterated endlessly by the EU. Either, but this formula, when requests are presented to Belgrade, it's contrary to the Serbian constitution and to the international law, in particular the UN Security Council resolution that is binding for everyone. We think that the solution lies within the political and diplomatic dimension. It's about the implementation of international law and the UN Security Council Resolution 1244 of the 10th of June 1999, Russia will protect and support and take the decisions, adopt decisions that will be with which the people of Serbia will be pleased. I mean, in the context of the mentioned issue. Thank you. Thank you. Is Xinhua with us? Yes. Hello, Madam Zakharova. Xinhua, correspondent with you. Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi recently, during a press conference, outlined China's global governance initiative, highlighting that the core of this initiative is to preserve and strengthen the leadership role and the centrality of the UN. What is Russia's position on China's global governance initiative, and what joint actions will China and Russia undertake in the future to implement genuine multilateralism and promote a more equitable and rational system of global governance? Thank you. I would remind Russian President Vladimir Putin during the SCO Plus meeting on the 1st of September 2025 in Tianjin gave a positive assessment to the global governance initiative proposed by then President Xi Jinping. The Russian leader expressed support and Russia's interests in discussing the proposals by our Chinese friends. And in accordance with the mutual understandings reached at the highest level and enshrined in the Chinese-Russian joint statement of the 8th of May 2025, our countries intend to fully realize the potential of bilateral relations, protect the international system with the UN at its center and based on the UN Charter, promote the establishment of an equitable and orderly multipolar world and democratization of international relations, and consolidate efforts aimed at creating a more just multipolar world. We think that this initiative is an important element of international discussion in different aspects of forming multipolar world order. Like many other states, Russia views it as a more equitable foundation for a world order adapted to changing global balance of power, in which the positions of non-Western states and international associations are strengthening, and we hope that it will contribute to strengthening practical coordination between Moscow and Beijing at various international platforms, including the SCO and BRICS, and ensuring stability in our common Eurasian space based on Vladimir Putin's initiative to create a new Eurasian security architecture. Thank you very much. Thank you. Is Reuters with us?
Reuters with us. Yes, good afternoon. We have two questions today, first of which is linked to Iran. During the daily briefing for journalists, Press Secretary of the President, Dmitry Peskov, mentioned that many of Russia's propositions in regards to the resettlement are still on the table. Could you please clarify what are those propositions and what, in the opinion of the Russian MFA, could be done to settle the conflict in the shortest possible term? In regards to what can be done, we have not only know that, we have formulated, as you said, a proposal, and we have intense contacts going on in the MFA. I will not delve into the clarifications because this is a part of a diplomatic scrupulous work. Thank you. And my second question once again deals with Iran. Now, in regards to the statements of Western politicians, including Antonio Costa, some other Western media, call Russia as the main beneficiary of the conflict between the conflict in the Middle East. How could you comment on these types of statements of Western politicians? I will clarify, just to quote directly. Excuse me, just for a second. It will take less than a minute for me to check the quote. I will not deprive myself of the pleasure of finding the exact context. You know, there is an impression. I've found it. Just to be extremely clear, I have an impression that when Antonio Costa and others right now we're talking about Western European officials saying that Russia is the main beneficiary of the existing tragic ongoing events in the Middle East, I have the impression that they are quoting the song, not in the key that is intended. Remember the lines that I'm Russian, I am lucky to be Russian. Well, truly, just wanted to say, that I think that it begs the question: are they crazy? At what stage did they have these terrible thoughts in their mind? At what stage in their Western European countries, in the Brussels corridors, in NATO, in the EU, anywhere in the sidelines, perhaps they were talking that it was a mistake to reject the Russian energy resources because it would lead to a veritable disaster for their economies, but perhaps they were afraid to say it publicly. At that stage, perhaps this thought got into their mind, and I mentioned this many times today. They're monstrous, terrible mistakes, critical errors in the statistics, in the economy. I don't know who committed them. Those mistakes that made the foundation of the terrible, criminal decisions of the European Commission and the European Union, those who doomed their own citizens to suffer, have nothing to do with this. That's their mistakes, their crime against their own population, against international law. And those very terrible mistakes / crimes are resulting in the crisis we are currently witnessing in the EU. No one told them, no one forced them to reject Russian energy, except for one. The United States, during different administrations, had the same idea. None other actor influenced the European Union in that vein. I can't say anything about the UK. I don't know anything about that. I'm just judging by the public statements and practical steps taken. Washington forced the EU first back in 2014 to adopt anti-Russian sanctions, despite not adopting them themselves. Then they forced them to reject the Russian energy resources in favor of American LPG. And then they would threaten to destroy the Nord Stream pipeline, which was subsequently destroyed. All those problems of EU Commission should be placed not on Russia's tab or China's tab or any aliens they might come up with, but only on themselves. They have only themselves to blame. The level of being corrupted by their accomplices from beyond the ocean in the very bloc of NATO. What has Russia got to do with it? Moreover, I'm pointing your attention to the fact that despite everything, Russia confirmed not only our capability, but our principled position as to there cannot be any politicization of energy cooperation as being done in the West, because primarily this is a question of security. This we have the same opinion for economy, saying that any legitimate sanctions measures should not be applied. So all questions should be addressed to them. This is another telling demonstration that the EU leadership in their anti-Russian hysteria are viewing any actions and estimates in the regards of damaging Russia. It is becoming absurd, even in the context of U.S. aggression against Iran. What has Russia has to do with that? The head of the European Council is worried not about the stabilization situation in the region, but the probability of the growth of Russia's proceeds from exporting hydrocarbons, with taking into consideration the current situation. They need to take the entirety of the question into consideration, not just parts of it. That's why we see European bureaucrats are trying to lift any accountability for any obvious fails in foreign internal policy. They have stuck to the tried and tested practice of blaming Russia for everything, and now they are just trying to change the situation by just bringing China into it too. Regarding the prices of energy, the current destabilization, yes, it caused the sharp rise in oil prices and gas prices, but remember how often this was mentioned by Russian President Putin in different forums and conferences regarding the long-term stable agreements on energy. If they had done it, perhaps they wouldn't have suffered, or wouldn't be affected as much. Perhaps currently, if such agreements were in place, they would be better off. But now they have what they've got. According to different estimates, the price of oil and gas has grown by from 60 to 100%. It's obvious that imbalance in the global energy markets is wrought with serious negative consequences for the entirety of the world economy, very detrimental to the Brussels regime that has essentially disarmed themselves, deprived themselves of resources. We shouldn't forget that the current situation, I'd like to stress it once again, the current situation in the energy security in the EU primarily is a result of a short-sighted, vassal-like policy of the very European leaders, including the forced rejection of Russian hydrocarbons and the mindless obsession with the green environmental agenda. I will provide the corresponding links of all the statements made by Russia and the President of Russian Federation in textual briefing, namely about propositions to the Western countries and the Western Europeans, proposing them long-term stable strategic relations with Russia, which by the time the statements were made have been time-tested and justified their effectiveness. Yes, Madam Zakharova, thank you very much. Thank you for the extended answer. Is Sputnik Abkhazia with us right now? Yes, Madam Zakharova, good afternoon. Last year, there were elections in Abkhazia. How do you evaluate the level of relations between Russia and Abkhazia? Has it changed in the last year, and were there any prospects opening for the Republic? Thank you. The allied relations between Russia and Abkhazia in recent times are characterized by the positive dynamic. Last year, we've affected a large number of mutually beneficial projects in the economy, humanitarian, and other spheres. Just to mention the resumption of the work of the airport of Sukhum, reconstructed by the Russian investor. Also, I can mention the launch of comfortable modern trains from Adler to Sukhum, the renovation of memorials, the health checkup of children, the improvement of medical and educational establishment. This all helped improve the quality of life in the Republic and comfort for the Russian tourists, making Abkhazia even more attractive for Russian tourists. But a lot has been implemented, but more is being planned. With the assistance of Russia, Abkhazia is implementing a new state program of social and economical development for 2026-2030, an investment program for the period of 2026-2028. There are joint cultural, student, and sports programs which are popular with the population. This work is being continued for the sake of both our peoples. Thank you. Thank you. Is the Chinese Media Corporation with us? Yes, good afternoon. We have two questions. The first question concerns the recent press conference of the head of the MFA of China, Wang Yi, who called relations between China and Russia durable and stable as a mountain. Our great powers are continuing this approach against the backdrop of actions of other states, and which reckoning points this new model presupposes for the building of a new, or more just and multipolar world. We share this vivid description of our bilateral relations. Chungliu Iju, a cliff among the roaring torrent of water. This can describe our relations with China. The able leadership of our two states, Russian-Chinese relationship, has reached an unprecedented high level and continues to develop. Our interaction is unique in representing a mutually respectful dialogue of two great powers in the world. We view ourselves as a priority partners, and we are providing mutual assistance on questions of mutual interest. We delineate the formula of our bilateral ties as relations of comprehensive partnership and strategic interaction in the new era. This reflects a new quality of our ties, which have resulted from the work and diplomacy of our leaders, the President of the Russian Federation, Vladimir Putin, and President of the People's Republic of China, Xi Jinping. And the blooming of relations between our countries has come during the period of accumulating transformation in the world arena. Russia and China are independent centers of power in the process of forming a polycentric world order. We intend to defend a national system with the UN at the center, the relations in which we are built with a foundation with reference to the goals and principles of the UN and all their completeness and interaction. We intend to continue to help our mutually beneficial and equal multipolarity in the world and help the democratization of international relations. I have a second question. In his exclusive interview to the Chinese Media Corporation, the official representative of the Iranian MFA stated that any diplomatic approach of the United States cannot be trusted, and faced with flagrant aggression of the United States and Israel, Iran will take all efforts necessary. what is the result of this crisis of trust for the foreign policy choice of the countries of the region? Will the countries of the region reevaluate their stances since they've been relying on the United States for the longest time? Our partners in the Middle East are sovereign and independent states, so they have the full right to independently choose their foreign policy course. And we mentioned this previously all the time, and the Minister of Foreign Affairs, Russian Federation, Mr. Lavrov, in his statement at the ambassadorial roundtable, which took place on March 5th in Moscow, mentioned this. In his first statement, linked with the armed aggression against Iran of February 28, we underlined the fact that the United States and Israel, by plunging the Middle East into the abyss of uncontrolled escalation, are practically forcing the states of the entire world, especially in the region, to get more serious means of countering the existing threats. Thank you, thank you. Is Anadolu with us? Yes. Good afternoon. We have one question today. Did Russia provide any humanitarian assistance to Iran, or were there any requests from in regards to the refugees from Iran? I think I mentioned this today in the first materials, first statements I enunciated during today's meeting in regards to the situation, humanitarian situation in Iran, etc. Number of victims of this military excursion of the United States and Israel is numbering in the thousands. The educational, medical establishment being bombed, the cultural heritage sites are being bombed, and the environmental damage is immense, especially in Tehran and its neighborhood. The negative consequences for the region in all aspects are significant and are detrimental, primarily for the livelihood and health of the people. Unfortunately, they will have a long-term character to them. And due to the difficult humanitarian situation, the President of the Russian Federation ordered the Ministry of ordered the Emercom to dispatch medicine and humanitarian aid to Iran, and Emercom, as the charged ministry, will be sharing information on that regard, and we will be also relaying this information through our lines. Despite the fact that this led to destabilization of the Middle East due to the campaign of the United States and Israel, we don't see any refugee flows as of now. However, the further escalation could only lead to irreversible consequences. Thank you very much.
Is Bold News with us? Yes, hello, Madam Zakharova. Annually, on the 16th of March, Latvia commemorates the Day of the Remembrance of the Latvian SS Legion. Thousands of people participate in the march, and believing it is normal to honor the memory of their great fathers and great-grandfathers who fought against the Red Army. How can Russia respond to this propaganda? Actually, we do not choose our ancestors. We continue their lives, and everyone has different history. And just to remember them according to different traditions, it's just a natural manifestation of humanity, a good manifestation of a human essence. Another case is glorification and honoring anti-heroes, when instead of mentioning them quietly at home or during some religious ceremony, or as some, tragic assessment of softly speaking, not very noble and criminal deeds of their ancestors. We see their heroization. It's just cannot be tolerated. And Russia strongly condemns the ongoing neo-official fascist bacchanalia in Latvia and in the Baltics. It's not about people not having the rights to remember their ancestors. It's about people not having the right to present criminals as heroes. And they have no right to make others forget who was a criminal and who was a hero. And the state has no right to promote that glorification of Nazis and collaborators. But here we see a target for the attack of their propaganda machine. The glorification of Nazism has become an ideological foundation of the ruling elite in the Baltics. They justify the crimes committed against humanity during the Great Patriotic War, and the local Baltic executioners killed over 300,000 civilians in Latvia and the same number of prisoners of war, approximately. 150,000 civilians and 230,000 prisoners of war were killed in Lithuania. In Estonia, approximately 61,000 civilians and 64,000 captured Soviet soldiers. Why were they killed? For fighting against Nazism and fascism? They should mention that. Those who will march along the streets of Riga, another shameful action is planned. The Jewish population was almost completely exterminated there, and collaborators in that extermination are still hiding. However, books have been published on crimes of the Baltic regime in the years of the Second World War. Now we see how they make heroes allegedly of resistance against the Soviet rule. They're presenting the executioners as heroes. It's just rabid Russophobia. And Russia has to counter the massive falsification of historical events and the revision of the results of the Second World War. The Russian Ministry of Foreign Affairs is conducting systematic work to counter those malicious tendencies. And with the connivance of the authorities, evidence of the spread of Nazi ideas in the Baltic states, it has been clearly highlighted in the Russian Foreign Ministry's reports. Those reports have been published on the ministry website. The link is in our social media accounts. And we also present regular reports on the situation with the glorification of Nazism, the spread of neo-Nazism, and other practices that contribute to the escalation of modern forms of racism, xenophobia, and related intolerance. Fascism did not pass in 1945. However, it marched through Western European countries, marched eastwards. Now we see the sounds of another neo-Nazi march. It will not pass, and we are doing our best for that. Thank you very much. Is Lenta.ru with us? Yes, we have a question to you today. The Ukrainian leader Vladimir Zelensky said that Kiev will seek participation of European countries in negotiations with Russia to resolve the conflict. How does the Russian side consider the participation of EU representatives in the negotiation process? So we have on multiple occasions presented comments on this issue. They have blocked any contacts themselves. It's not we who have torn those relations with them. So they just pursued that policy, as they said, political isolation of Russia. Within the EU, there are such discussions about possibilities of resuming communications. Now it's just discussions because their own public poses those questions, but no concrete actions have followed by them. And we have no doubt that the European Union will play an exclusively destructive role in negotiations and in the context of the Ukrainian crisis is just testifies for itself. Those guarantees to Viktor Yanukovych in February 2014, they didn't last even a day. The Minsk agreements, we will never forget them. The Europeans admitted they used them to prepare Ukraine for war with Russia. The Istanbul process is in our memory forever as well. In February-March 2022, it was undermined by promises to help Kiev win on the battlefield, as they put it back then. And that motto, they supported it for a couple of years more. So those so-called peace initiatives that could not become a basis for agreements, none of them. Zelensky's peace formula, notorious peace formula, and deployment of a Western allegedly peacekeeping contingent on the Ukrainian territory. We know what they are as peacekeepers. Now the latest example is distributed by Kaja Kallas draft discussion document with absurd demands on Russia, without which the European Union, as they put it, will not support peace in Ukraine. All that is happening against the backdrop of ongoing efforts to supply weapons to Kiev and constant attempts to put obstacles to any efforts by third countries to find a peaceful resolution to the crisis, and ignoring casualties among children, among civilians, so it's just a green light to terrorism of the Kiev regime by Brussels. All the facts mentioned, they just illustrate the destructive nature of the European Union's role in the situation surrounding Ukraine as a whole. We remain open to direct dialogue and honest negotiations with all pragmatic and conscientious partners. And we are ready to discuss the Eurasian security issues, including the Ukrainian conflict. Thank you. Thank you. Information Agency intelligence reporters with us. Yes, we have a question. Russian president said it's ready to stop supplies of gas to the EU. So do you think the war with Iran, it can make the EU improve the relations with Russia again? So for the Italian citizens to understand why they have such expensive petrol and for them paying so much for utility expenses, they just need to study the military procedures in their own country, in Italy. And why are the relations torn under the pressure of the European Union? Why does the US make them abandon cultural, humanitarian ties with Russia? Why the EU should ban itself energy cooperation with Russia? So they should have waited for the US and Israel to attack Iran and to put those questions during the political discussions and debates and to require a response. Yes, we see that fuel prices in the EU, they are not stable, their level is critical. And this tendency was marked long before this crisis. With regard to the aggression of the US against Iran, it's a consequence of the criminal policy with regard to their own citizens and energy sphere, where they persistently forced by the European Commission led by Ursula von der Leyen. And those decisions could not lead to any other outcome. It's a forced objection to import Russian oil and gas. Regarding Italy, the prospect of rising energy prices is understandably causing tension in Italian society. Just have a look at our country, at our officials, the president, foreign minister. Have a look at our political scientists. Has anyone used this as a pretext for mocking, sarcasm, some angry statements against Italian citizens? Just have a look. What a bad situation you have. No, nothing of the kind has happened. We were trying to explain, to convince the Italian citizens what is happening on the European continent. We cited facts. We told about how we should be based on analysis, scientific analysis, how the situation will develop, but it's due to the fault of the Italian media. People are not much informed by their own leaders about what is happening in our country and about the decisions taken by the Italian government. It's denial to cooperate with the Russian Federation. The Apennine businesses are paying much more for energy than in France and Germany, and according to Italian experts, losses because of the curtailment of energy cooperation with Russia from 2022 amounted to at least 60 billion euro in additional costs, at least, for businesses and households, expenses on gas and electricity, and approximately 100 billion euros is government subsidies. It will inevitably lead to a further deterioration in the overall socio-economic situation in the country. Despite the openly discriminatory and anti-market actions of the European Union, Russia is trying to avoid any politicization of energy supplies to European consumers. Our country has repeatedly confirmed its readiness to develop mutually beneficial energy cooperation with all constructively minded partners. During the meeting on the global oil and gas market on the 9th of March, the Russian President Vladimir Putin once again clearly outlined our approach to this issue. The conditions are simple and clear: a guarantee of stable long-term demand and the conscientious fulfillment of our partners' obligations. But the EU leadership is clearly unprepared to restore a normal dialogue. Russophobia is just winning over anything: common sense, human rights, and actually democracy. The European Commission and the most militant EU member states continue to use any means to literally squeeze any energy products, squeeze them out of the EU market. What will be the supplement? Liquefied natural gas that will need to be transported to the European continent. But what is done with international law and in the global ocean? Just have a look. And Brussels is aimed at confrontation with Russia at any cost. So who is ordering this music? I have mentioned that. If that's all for you, we'll move on. Is news.ru with us? Yes, hello, Madam Zakharova. We have two questions today. How does Russian Foreign Ministry assess US President Donald Trump's statements that Cuba could face a friendly or hostile takeover if it refuses to reach a deal with Washington? Does Moscow consider the statements a direct threat to the sovereignty of an independent state and a violation of international law? We have repeatedly voiced our position that we consider the language of blackmail absolutely counterproductive and not complying with any norms of international law or moral values. Those statements are contrary to the UN Charter, human rights, and the laws of interstate communication. We call upon resolution by political diplomatic means. We do not comment traditionally on the third countries' relations, but we would reiterate our stance with regard to the Republic of Cuba. Russia and Cuba are linked with friendly relations. For the entire history, we have supported the Cuban people in their fight for independence, their desire to support the law, and our relations are supported by the public. They are not against any third countries and aimed at prosperity of Russian and Cuban peoples. For around 7 decades, Cuba has been subject to economic, financial, trade pressure by the US. Russia is unchangeably providing all the necessary support to Havana on international platforms in fighting countering unilateral sanctions, and Cuba is facing unprecedented force and economic pressure by Washington, of course. And we attentively follow the developments in the Caribbean region, and we are against any illegal actions. We support mutually beneficial cooperation with Cuba in the conditions of the complicated economic situation that is a consequence of a multi-year American blockade. We intend to further support the Cuban people in this historical period that is very complicated. Our second question, we have mentioned Moldova today. They have decided to quit the CIS treaties, and Chisinau is of unfriendly position with regard to Russia. So these tearing ties with the CIS, are any hostile steps by the Moldovan leadership possible, somehow similar to what Romania has done, assisting Ukraine against Russia? We have already provided comments on this issue that Moldovan authorities take efforts to formalize the final tiering of our relations on the CIS space. They have denounced 3 basic CIS documents: Agreement of CIS cooperation and its additional protocol. Moldovan parliament has said that the final vote will take place before Easter, before the 12th of April. And there are no doubts that leaving some international instrument is a sovereign right of Moldova. But in the Republic itself, just have a look. Local experts point at the inevitable crashing of the economy after the country is leaving the CIS. It's during the stop of the so-called Euro integration project. What is happening within the EU community? Economic, industrial crisis. What should Moldova expect? As it is joins this community without any proposals on development, but just some fake promises. They're just made to enter this orbit of the EU's geopolitical interests, but not some assistance financial economic assistance because the EU have no means to allocate them this assistance. The Italian media representative has recently, as I understand it's an Italian citizen, he asked about the growth in prices in Italy, growth in energy prices. So it's the economy that used to prosper. It's in a deep crisis now. So how will they support Moldovan economy? Of course, they will not think about it. As for the pressure imposed on Transnistria, it's contrary to the constitution, contrary to the neutral status, and supporting the Kiev regime. Official Chisinau has done that for a long time. We should not expect the Moldovan authorities to abandon somehow this destructive policy that actually weakens Moldova itself. Brussels sponsors will not allow them to do that. They just govern, but do not sponsor them financially.
Спасибо.
Thank you very much. Is Al-Mayadin with us? Yes, good afternoon. As you already commented, the recent actions of Sweden authorities in regards to the Russian citizens, including the detention and the ban from entry. Just the last part.
Action by Swedish authorities against Russian citizens, including like detention and the entry bans.
Просто я не ожидала, что...
I just didn't expect Al-Mayadin to be interested in Sweden, but why not? We see that the confrontational anti-Russian rhetoric that the public in Sweden was pumped by in Sweden. Now we see Stockholm is starting some demonstrative actions against Russian citizens due to their sort of incorrect citizenship. In the recent period, we saw some cases where Russian scientists or highly qualified specialists to be threat to national security, and I quote. We see absolutely inhumane detention of Russian citizens for such ships as vessel Adler and vessel Kafa, and the Schengen visas issued by other European Union countries and Schengen countries were nullified. There are sanctions issued against Russian businesses, Russian officials, and there are all sorts of obstructions that Russian embassy in Stockholm is facing while trying to provide consular aid to Russian citizens who have found themselves in a difficult situation. And we see an overwhelming level of hatred to Russian citizens reflected in the recent statement by the foreign Prime Minister, now the leader of parliamentary opposition, representative of the Social Democratic Party of Sweden, Magdalena Anders, namely stating that the European nuclear potential is enough, and I quote her directly, "It is enough to bomb Russia into oblivion." This begs the question, who are you, Magdalena Andersson, to threaten Russia with a nuclear arsenal and proceed to say that Russia, there will be nothing left of Russia because they would ostensibly bomb us into oblivion. What has happened in your life to make her say this in her statement? Perhaps she was initiator of a global peaceful settlement, or she prevented a catastrophic outcome in the Middle East, or helped the citizens of the European Union to defend their sovereignty and independence. I have a proposition to Madam Magdalena Andersson to busy herself with the issues at hand of a neighboring state. Greenland is requiring protection. She needs protectors from among the EU states. Try to defend your own sovereignty as members of the European Union, as old European democracies, and only then try to instruct the planet how they should live. In regards to the nuclear topic, nuclear dossier, we already talked in detail how destructive are those mindless statements in regards to the nuclear weapons when said by Western officials, because they teach their own public, like in bad action movies, you can shoot a person 45 times only for him to continue walking, that there are limitless bullets in a pistol or in a rifle that can have 120 bullets in a clip. And any such talk when it concerns nuclear weapons is inadmissible. Perhaps this makes me wonder, can anyone vote for this person after such statements? Or are these kind of people precisely the sort of people they are voting for in the European Union, with a complete lack of education that they can get any goal accomplished, even self-destruction? And if I may, I could ask through you the question to the Swedish establishment, to the ruling party or the opposition party, just to try to help your officials, your Swedish citizens, just show them the map, give them a map with a distance from Moscow to Stockholm, and how long this wave will, how long will it take for the wave of fallout to reach Sweden if they are guided by their comrade in arms Annalena Baerbock, saying that to change a position, it would only take a 60-degree turn to change their position. Someone could explain them, just judging by the raw distance, that by striking one European country would mean all the fallout immediately reaching another. Then perhaps it would warrant the focus on preventive measures, on scientific studies, and self-educate. There are, of course, a very tragic but very telling representative example, namely the Chernobyl nuclear power plant tragedy. Still, every year, affected countries remember this tragedy and remember how this wave, how this curtain of smoke or fallout or precipitation affected the European continent as a whole. So I'd like to warn all compatriots, Russian compatriots planning their trip to Sweden. I would like to urge them to bear in mind the absolutely causeless persecution unleashed by the Swedish authorities, and perhaps on a request from a third country still in Sweden, and accusing them of any criminal conduct or crimes. There is no need for that anymore. Just it's enough to be a resident of Russia, have a Russian passport, to be detained. This is pure chauvinism now in the Swedish iteration. If that's it for you, colleagues, we can go further, but I will have to finish the briefing earlier. So let's get to the last question, and the remaining ones will be answered individually. Broader Asia, please, you have the floor. Yes, good afternoon. Broader Asia TV channel. This week we received information that NATO will be reviewing the hypothetical scenarios of conflict involving Russia in the Arctic. Earlier in the West, there were concerns linked to the fact that the Chinese scientific research submarines went under the polar ice for the first time. and they allege that this is a new threat to the far north. And China, since 2018, positioned itself as a state close to Arctic and developing their own nuclear icebreaker, and is intending to build a polar Silk Road. How does the Russian MFA evaluate such impression of the Arctic as an arena of conflict, and namely, how do Russia and China developing cooperation in that Arctic? Let's start from that fact that NATO is intending to narrow down the neutral space on the entire perimeter of Russian borders. Just let's look at the Baltic. At a previous time, it was a very calm region. The alliance doesn't conceal their aggressive intent, and the Arctic is not an exception. And recently we see that the level of conflict in the northern latitude is growing, and the hypothetical scenario of conflict with our country has been long devised by NATO, and they have been conducting dozens of military drills. In February 2026, they have launched the Arctic Watchman initiative, an operation intended primarily to deter Russia and China in the polar region, to grow the military presence of the bloc close to our northern borders. The North Atlantic Bloc is once again confirms its resume as a destroyer of stability and inciter of international confrontation. And now it's Arctic's turn, and this is being given under the pretext of Russian threats. And NATO is quick to find the Russian trace in any dossier they have, including the Greenland dossier. Russia and Beijing view each other as a very important strategic partners. We are intrinsically sticking to the principles of mutually respectful, equal and trusted cooperation, and decisive mutual support on questions key to both our countries. This, of course, concerns such an aspect as interaction in the Arctic region. We jointly support the preservation of peace and stability and the prevention of military political tensions in the Arctic. We see huge interest on the part of our Chinese friends in promoting projects in the Russian polar region. We are open for such interaction, and this has been enshrined in different documents on different levels, including the joint statement of our leaders of 8th of May 2025. To coordinate this work in the framework of we have a mechanism of regular meetings of heads of governments of Russia and China. We have a separate working group. Jointly with our partners, we are conducting work to unleash the transport logistic potential of the Northern Sea route, to explore mineral resources, promote science and research activity in the region. And China is contributing significantly in the Arctic Council. Russia is always open to have constructive contacts in the Arctic and other countries from beyond the region, which only helps to support the international dialogue in the region and calm the military political standoff. We have two other questions unanswered. I will answer them individually. Sorry for that. I will, due to the time schedule issues, and I will be answering those individually. Thank you very much.